The moment my son-in-law didn't look up from his phone when I walked into the boardroom, I knew exactly what kind of meeting this was going to be. I'd been in that room hundreds of times. I'd helped pick the carpet. I'd argued for the windows that faced the river because I thought natural light made people think more clearly. 29 years of my life were baked into the walls of that building, and the kid sitting at the head of the table, my daughter's husband of 3 years, couldn't be bothered to put his phone down for 30 seconds. His name was Flint. Flint Okafor. My daughter met him at a conference in Vancouver, brought him home for Christmas, married him in Kelowna the following June. I liked him well enough at first. He was sharp, confident, had an MBA from Queen's. My daughter loved him. That was enough for me. It stopped being enough around the time he started showing up at Meridian Structural Solutions with opinions. Meridian was mine. Not in the sentimental way people say things like that. I built it from a folding table in my garage in Waterloo in 1994 with $40,000 I borrowed from my father-in-law and a civil engineering license I'd spent 6 years earning. We did bridge inspections and load assessments for municipal contracts across Ontario. By 2005, we had 38 employees. By 2015, we had over 200, offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Halifax. And a software platform I'd spent 4 years developing with my head of engineering, a structural assessment tool we called FrameCalc that had become the backbone of everything we did. FrameCalc wasn't just software. It was a methodology. It was the way we thought about load distribution, material fatigue, failure point prediction. I'd filed the IP under Meridian's name, but I'd negotiated a specific clause with our corporate lawyer when we incorporated the software division. The clause said, in plain language, if I was ever removed from executive leadership without cause, or if the company underwent a change of controlling interest without my written consent, the licensing rights to FrameCalc reverted to me personally within 90 days. My lawyer had suggested it. I'd almost removed it because it felt paranoid at the time. Who was going to push me out of my own company? I found out on a Tuesday in March. Flint set his phone face down on the table. My CFO, a man named Bertrand who'd been with me for 11 years, wouldn't make eye contact. The 2 board members I recognized, I'd appointed both of them, stared at the wall. The other 3 faces I didn't know at all. That alone told me something had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. We want to talk about the direction of the company, Flint said. You called a board meeting to talk about direction, I said, without telling me. We sent a notice to my personal email at 11 o'clock last night. He shrugged, not an apology. Just an acknowledgement that yes, that's what happened, and no, he didn't feel particularly bad about it. I looked at Bertrand. He finally looked back at me, and what I saw in his face wasn't guilt exactly. It was exhaustion. Like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just decided to put it down, regardless of where he was standing when he did it. The vote had already happened, it turned out. Before I walked in, the 3 new faces were proxy votes from a private equity group out of Calgary, Kestrel Bridge Capital, that my son-in-law had been quietly courting for 8 months. They'd bought into a holding structure that Flint had set up through a numbered company, and together with Flint's shares and the 2 board members I thought were loyal to me, they had just enough to push through a leadership transition. Flint was the new executive chair. He'd hired a CEO already, someone from the energy sector, a name I didn't recognize. We're pivoting, Flint said. Infrastructure software is where the value is. We're going to license FrameCalc to municipalities across Western Canada and the US. The engineering services side is being wound down over 18 months. He said it like he was reading from a deck, calm, rehearsed. You're killing the company, I said. We're evolving it. You're gutting 30 years of relationships and 200 people's jobs so you can turn a methodology into a SaaS product you don't understand. He finally looked at me. You've been resistant to this for 2 years. That's the problem. I've been cautious. There's a difference. Not to the board. I left my laptop on the table. I didn't pack anything. I walked down the hall past offices where people who'd worked for me for a decade were answering emails and drinking coffee and had no idea what had just happened. I got in the elevator. I rode it to the parking garage, sat in my car for 40 minutes without starting it. My phone lit up almost immediately. My daughter, Renata, called 3 times. I didn't answer. I didn't know yet whether she'd known, and I wasn't ready to find out. The drive home to Guelph took an hour and 15 minutes. My wife met me at the door. She'd seen something on my face in the driveway, she said later, before I even got out of the car. Her name is Colette, and we've been married 31 years, and she has never once in all that time tried to fix something before she understood it. She sat me down at the kitchen table, made tea I didn't drink, and listened without interrupting for almost an hour. When I finished, she said, "What was in your original incorporation documents for FrameCalc?" I looked at her. "You made me read them when you filed," she said. "There was a clause." I drove back to Waterloo the next morning, not to Meridian, to the home of my original corporate lawyer, a man named Clement who'd retired 3 years earlier and now spent his time restoring a 1968 Dodge Charger in his garage outside of Cambridge. I called ahead. He told me to come. I sat in his garage while he wiped grease off his hands, and I explained what had happened. He listened. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise. Then he went inside and came back with a binder. "I kept copies of everything," he said. "I always kept copies." The clause was still there, exactly as I remembered it. Change of controlling interest, without written consent of the founding shareholder. That was the trigger. Kestrel Bridge's acquisition through the numbered company qualified. The 90-day clock started the day the transaction closed, which, Clement confirmed after making 2 phone calls, had been registered with the Ontario Securities Commission 11 days ago. The licensing rights to FrameCalc, Clement said, reading the language slowly, revert to the founding shareholder upon the triggering event. The company retains operational use for a transition period of 6 months, after which continued use requires a new licensing agreement negotiated at fair market value. "Is it still valid?" I asked. I needed to hear him say it. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. "Every word of it. I didn't call Flint. I didn't call Bertrand. I didn't call anyone at Meridian. I went home, I told Colette what Clement had said, and she held my hand at the kitchen table for a while without either of us saying anything. The thing about being 61 years old and having your life's work yanked out from under you is that you have 2 choices about what to do with the anger. You can spend it fast, call people, send emails, make threats, hire lawyers and start fights and let everyone know exactly how betrayed you feel. I've seen men do that. It almost never ends well. The anger burns through in a week and you're left with nothing but legal bills and the knowledge that you gave the other side a reason to paint you as unstable. Or you can bank it, let it settle into something quieter and harder and more useful. I banked it, spent the first week making lists. Everything I knew about FrameCalc, every client, every contract, every municipality that used the platform, every integration point, every piece of infrastructure that had been assessed using our methodology. I knew this software better than anyone alive because I had helped design it. I knew where it was load-bearing, so to speak, and where it was decorative. I spent the second week meeting with a technology IP lawyer in Toronto named Sonia. She'd been recommended by a colleague I trusted. I sat in her office on King Street for 2 hours and walked her through the clause, the transaction, the timeline. She took notes. She asked careful questions. At the end, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Mr. Ashworth, I want to be very clear about something. If this reversion clause is enforceable, and based on what you've described, I believe it is, then what you're holding is not a grievance. It's an asset." "I know," I said. "A significant one." "I know that too." She filed the formal notice of reversion on a Thursday afternoon, registered and delivered to Meridian's legal department. I know the exact moment it arrived because Bertrand called me 40 seconds later. I watched his name on my phone screen. I did not pick up. I made a cup of coffee. I sat by the window in the kitchen and watched the backyard and thought about the bridge my grandfather had helped build over the Speed River in 1962, which was still standing, which my company had inspected twice, which would outlast everyone in this story. Flint called that evening, then again. Then my daughter called, and her voice when she left the voicemail was something I hadn't heard from her since she was a child. Tight, a little frightened. I called her back. "Did you know?" I asked. Not accusatory, I genuinely needed to know. There was a pause that lasted long enough to tell me the answer was complicated. "He told me it was a restructuring," she said. "I didn't know about the vote. I didn't know about Kestrel Bridge." I believed her. "Renata is many things, but she is not a liar. She got that from her mother." "Your husband made a significant mistake," I said. "I need you to understand that I'm going to address it. Not to hurt him. Not to hurt you. But because what he took wasn't just my company, it was something I built with a specific intention and a specific protection in place." She was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let the process work," I said. The next 6 weeks were not dramatic from the outside. No courtrooms, no raised voices. Sonia and Meridian's new legal team exchanged correspondence. Kestrelbridge brought in their own lawyers, a Bay Street firm whose name I recognized. They argued the numbered company structure created sufficient distance from the triggering event as defined in the clause. Sonia had anticipated this. She had a 60-page rebuttal ready within 10 days. What Flint and Kestrelbridge apparently hadn't fully accounted for was that the software launch they'd been planning, the big Western Canada municipal rollout that was the centerpiece of the pivot strategy, was scheduled for a product demonstration in Calgary in April. They'd already sent invitations to infrastructure directors from 14 cities. They'd booked the venue. They'd issued a press release. The demonstration required full access to FrameCalc's core algorithms. The algorithms were, as of Sonia's filing, subject to the reversion claim. Clement had been right, every word of it. I heard about the Calgary meeting through a former colleague who still had friends at Meridian. The rumor was that the technical team had gone pale when legal explained the situation. FrameCalc wasn't a bolt-on feature. It was the engine, everything they were trying to sell. The platform, the licensing model, the entire pitch to 14 municipalities ran on methodology that was now in dispute. Kestrelbridge made an offer in week 5. It was not serious. It was the kind of offer you make when you're hoping the other person is tired and wants it to be over. I was not tired. I was 59 years old, and I had been building things since I was 22, and I was not tired. We countered. They came back. Sonia and I met twice a week. She brought coffee. I brought the kind of patience that comes from spending decades waiting for a load assessment to come back on a bridge you're not sure about. On a Wednesday morning in late April, Kestrelbridge's lawyers called Sonia with a revised proposal. They wanted a licensing agreement, long-term, fair market value as the clause specified. They also offered to restore my title as founder and chief technical advisor, with a seat on the technical board and meaningful compensation. Flint would remain executive chair, but his operational authority would be significantly curtailed by a new governance structure. I read the proposal at my kitchen table with Colette sitting across from me. "Is it enough?" she asked. I thought about that for a while. It wasn't everything. Flint still had a title. Kestrelbridge still had their stake. The wind down of the engineering services division had already started. And some of those relationships were not coming back. There was real damage that no agreement was going to undo. But FrameCalc was mine again, formally and legally. The methodology I'd spent 4 years building, that had become the backbone of something significant, would carry my name on the licensing documentation. The 14 cities in Western Canada who used it would know where it came from. The engineering world, which is smaller than it looks, would know the whole story. And the Calgary demonstration, rescheduled for June, would go forward with my cooperation and my signature on the license. Not because I forgave what happened easily, but because 200 people still had jobs that depended on Meridian functioning, and I was not the kind of man who burned a building to settle a score. Renata called me the night after we signed. It was a long conversation, the kind where neither person is entirely sure what they're working toward, but both of them keep going because stopping feels worse. She told me Flint understood now that he'd misjudged the situation. I did not offer an opinion on that. I told her I loved her. I told her that whatever happened between her and her husband, I was her father, and that was not a position I was going to vacate. She cried a little. I did too, honestly, though I waited until after we hung up. Clement called to congratulate me. We went for lunch at a diner outside Cambridge that he'd been going to for 30 years. He ordered the same thing he apparently always ordered: grilled cheese, tomato soup, black coffee, and we sat there for 2 hours talking about things that had nothing to do with IP law or private equity or governance structures. His grandson had just started learning hockey. My wife's garden was coming in early because of the warm spring. The Speed River was running high. Before we left, he said, "You know what most people get wrong about clauses like yours?" "What's that?" "They think they're for fighting. They're not. They're for not having to fight. You put that language in the contract 30 years ago so that if the day ever came, you'd have something to stand on that wasn't just your word against theirs." He put on his coat. "Your father-in-law taught you something, lending you that money." I thought about that on the drive home. My father-in-law had been a man who didn't say much, but what he said he meant, and he put things in writing because he believed that clarity was a form of respect. He'd been gone for 12 years. I thought about him when I signed the licensing agreement. His name running somewhere in the background of all of it, the way a load-bearing member runs through a structure you can't always see. Meridian relaunched FrameCalc in June under a new name, the Brooks Ashworth Structural Assessment Platform. Brooks was the maiden name of my original head of engineering, a woman named Deborah who'd retired 4 years ago and cried when I called to tell her. The technical board insisted on the name. Flint had no objection. By that point, Flint had very few objections to anything the technical board proposed. The 14 cities signed on. Alberta Infrastructure sent a letter of intent for a provincial-level contract that Sonia said was worth more than anything Kestrel Bridge had modelled in their original pitch. I drove to Waterloo one afternoon in July, not for any particular reason, parked outside the building, looked at the windows on the 3rd floor where the engineering team works. Someone had put a plant on one of the sills, bright green against the glass, a small thing and not mine, and exactly right. I turned the car around and drove home to Guelph. Colette was in the garden. So I sat on the back steps and watched her work for a while and didn't say anything, and she looked up once and smiled at me in the particular way that means she already knows how the story ended.